What's up, y'all? Talon here. Today we're going to be going over the results from the January Victory Road Challenge, which was a pretty big grassroots tour with over a $2,000 prize pool. It was ultimately won by Tomoyuki Yoshimura, known by Snow online, one of the best Japanese players. I recreated all the teams with EVs, and I'm going to be going over each of those recreations in this video so that you guys can use them to good effect on the Pokemon Showdown ladder or recreate them in game with the EV spreads that I've outlined here. Definitely feel free to change them up as you like as you continue playing with the team. Hopefully this is a good starting point for you. If you enjoy these type of videos, please leave a like on the video, subscribe, and let me know what teams you want to see recreated in the future and what other kind of content you want to see from me. So yeah, with all that being said, let's hop into a breakdown of these teams now. So starting out from a top level view, it did look like Zamazenta had another solid weekend. It didn't have that many representatives in the top 16, or rather the top 15 final bracket, but ultimately was in the top 4 and in the top 16 with two relatively similar teams. Definitely some key differences between those two we'll go into, but yeah, Zamazenta had a pretty hot weekend despite not being that well represented in the top 16. Calyrex-Ice Spotted definitely the big winner this weekend. It wasn't doing that well in previous tours, but made a second place finish here, as well as a bunch of scattered finishes in the top 16. They did all tend to lose in the top 16 outside of this one that made it to second place, but yeah, definitely a better weekend for Calyrex-Ice Spotted overall. Yeah, this traditional Miraidon team as well as the Dozo team that got top 8 at the World Championship continues to do well. It's interesting that Dozo is definitely on the rise overall, both on this Miraidon team, which as mentioned did well at the World Championship, and then this variation of the Justin Knox, Calyrex-Ice Spotted, Weezing, Galar, Toxic Spike's Poison Gas team with a very bulky defense-raising order-up Dozo with body press has been continuing to do really well online. Definitely something to watch for the upcoming European regional. Beyond that, we do see again, I guess this is maybe the first Calyrex-Ice Spotted to get a top 16, or maybe it's been one before, but yeah, Calyrex-Ice Spotted continuing to do really pitiful in these tournaments. It's hard to say whether it's because of Calyrex-Ice Spotted not being that strong or just its top players not being represented in these tournaments, but yeah, definitely something to be on the watch for upcoming tours. We have Crystal running the Oliver Escalin Roaring Moon version of the Crystal Rain Calm Mind Kyogre team that's been doing pretty well online and did well at the World Championships, of course. And then, yeah, outside of that, another Groudon in top 8. Definitely curious. The best performance it had in all of Regulation G before was a top 16 at regionals, but this variation of the Joe Ugarte Jump Left Groudon team managed to get another big finish. I believe this was the first seed overall. So yeah, a strong team. Got to be on the lookout for Groudon. It definitely pairs really well into Miraidon. Not sure how strong it is into Calyrex-Ice Spotted, but of course you do have the Jump Left and the multiple Dark types on the team to handle that. So could be well poised for the metagame. We'll definitely have to see. If you do queue up into a lot of Miraidons, it's definitely a strong option for sure. Now looking in detail at these teams, as mentioned, I have the EV spreads for all of the top 16. I'll have that in the description below, but yeah, we'll be going into some of the details of those EV spreads now and how the teams generally function. So here we have Snow's team. We have the Zamazenta team. Actually, Snow kind of did a accidental battle box reveal on stream, so one of my friends did take the time to extract those from the brief time that Snow did reveal the team on stream. I went ahead and changed it over to the Zamazenta crown form instead of the base forms. You can see the stats a little bit better. The speed stat is outspeeding Chi-Yu +1, or rather +2, so if another Zamazenta is creeping Chi-Yu, you could outspeed them by 1 overall. The defensive investment here allows you to one-hit KO a no-bulk Urshifu water if you have Sword of Ruin on the field with body press a fair amount of the time. I think it's like 40% for the roll, which, you know, not in your favor, but if you do get the lucky end of that, can definitely swing the battle a fair bit. And the rest of the stat is just dumped into HP, 1 into attack to hit a little bit harder with Heavy Slam if you're going for that, and then for a little bit more in the special defense as well. The Chi-Yu is a Choice Scarf set running max speed just because if you're up against another Urshifu, which is Choice Scarf, you'll still outspeed that, and that can be important late game going for a strong overheat or just getting a bit more damage without getting knocked out yourself. Into the partner Pokemon, that can be pretty cool. At least some good general bulk as well as a fair amount of power still on the Chi-Yu spread. The Rillaboom is just really offensively inclined with max attack. The HP stat is 193, which is divisible by 16 +1, which a lot of Japanese players tend to just default to. It seems like, having looked at a lot of their EV spread, so that's getting the additional HP from the grassy terrain. But if for some reason you were like, you know, in an endgame where you had only taken burn damage, you'd take 17 ticks instead of 16 exactly if you were at 192. So not usually that relevant, but just something that I've noticed Japanese players tend towards a lot. And then the rest is dumped in the special defense stat. making sure we hit 104, which is an even number, so that we get the maximum value out of Assault Vest. Because Assault Vest boosts your special defense by 50%, you want to make sure it's an even number. That way you're getting a whole additional stat point, just because in Pokemon, typically when you're doing stat modifiers, it rounds down. So if you're at 105, you wouldn't get a whole additional point, you'd get half, and that would get rounded down. So it's important to get that even number so that we're maximizing the value out of the Assault Vest. It's not, critical, but these little things can make a difference in the long run. Next up on the Fluttermane, we have a fairly bulky spread. We have 244 in the HP, which again is divisible by 16 plus 1. Snow is running 132 defense on the Fluttermane. This is a really critical defense threshold for Fluttermane specifically, just because Urshifu Surging Strikes does 13.62 against this specific spread, but if you're running this, you would it's like a 2% chance to 1 at KO, which is really unlikely. However, if you run 124 or something, it ticks up to 42%. So generally, if you're running a bulky Fluttermane, it is better just try and hit that 132, find those EVs somewhere. Snow ended up running 4 in special attack, special defense, and then 124 in the speed stat. I would actually recommend going up to 132 just because Roaring Moon hits 188. And there is a uptick in booster speed Roaring Moon right now, so having the option just know that you'll outspeed that 100% of the time does seem kind of important to me, but if you do just want to run the original spread, it is the 124 and the 4 there. Chien-Pao, we're running an adamant spread here to be able to maximize your damage. You're still outspeeding Ogerpon, which is kind of the most important thing, because I feel like, most Fluttermane are not running Modest, so you're really just trying to outspeed other Chien-Pao, which you don't have Sacred Sword, so it's not that high value. And then Koraidon, which oftentimes are running Jolly, but you can still just trade against them with your Focus Sash and then do a lot with Ice Cold Crash and then follow up with a Sucker Punch. So I do think that Adamant is a good call in this no Sacred Sword Chien-Pao. Again, I do think that there is a slight modification I'd make here, is running 4 on the Chien-Pao just because it lets you take Surging Strikes a fair bit better. So yeah, you could run 4 HP, definitely a bit more general, but I think in circumstances versus Urshifu, the 4 defense could be more valuable. And then we have a max defense Amoonguss, which is just, very simple, 252, 2524, which oftentimes can do the trick. 27 IV in the speed stat allows you to underspeed Calyrex-Ice Rider in Trick Room, even if they are a Brave 0 speed one, so that can be pretty important. And I do want to comment on Sludge Bomb over Pollen Puff. I'd imagine Pollen Puff could be pretty high value for the Zamazenta, just healing it up, but here running Pollen Puff just because the rest of the team doesn't benefit from it that much. And also, if you have Chi on this field, Amoonguss doesn't have that low of a special attack stat, so the Sludge Bomb damage could be pretty relevant into something like a Rillaboom or something that's gone for a Grass Terra. Maybe opposing Ogerpon could be pretty crucial to get that Sludge Bomb off, so interesting choice there. So I went pretty in-depth into that one. Probably going to be a little bit less in-depth because a lot of the rest of these teams are kind of, not entirely repeats of previous weeks, but definitely very similar. So in the future, I probably won't review these teams in as great of a detail just because at this point we're starting to repeat teams pretty often. So this might be one of the last Victory Road EV recreations for a little bit, but definitely let me know if you would prefer me to do it on a more consistent basis. Up here we have the team that got second place. I think this honestly did really well last week as well. Basically, double grass type, Calyrex Shadow Rider, Incineroar, Urshifu, and Raging Bolt. Just some of the best supporting Pokemon in the format paired with a Calyrex Shadow Rider. You could go a bit more bulky. I'm just running max speed here to try and win the mirror as best as possible. With Terra Normal, that becomes even easier. Spell Tag is cool because if you get to +2, you have a great chance to knock out Amoonguss, which tends to be Calyrex-Ice Rider's biggest matchup piece against you. Once Trick Room goes up, just start sporing all your Pokemon, including the Calyrex Shadow Rider, because once you're asleep, they can manage to get 2 Glacial Lances off without you being able to fake out Cycle as well as go for Protect. So putting the Calyrex asleep on one of the off turns is pretty important, but if you're able to knock out the Amoonguss regardless of Terra type with a +2 Spell Tag Astral Barrage, that can be pretty important. Not a whole lot else to comment on. A pretty standard Rocky Helmet EV spread to be able to tank a Surging Strike from an Adamant Urshifu and live with just a bit of HP while also doing a huge chunk of damage with the Rocky Helmet. A very offensive Life Orb Raging Bolt, Amoonguss with the Covert Cloak to be able to dodge Fake Out. Urshifu, Stellar Terra, very important in the Terapagos matchup to be able to chip down the Terapagos early, then clean it up with a Stellar Terra close combat, even if you are intimidated by a little bit. So that's definitely a cool innovation as of late. Then a pretty standard Rillaboom spread, outspeeding max speed Incineroar, making sure that you are the faster of the fake outs and can't get surprised by that. So yeah, standard team, but definitely requires a lot of precision to play to finals. Next up, we have kind of a similar team to the one that ultimately won, but definitely some key differences. As a fire type instead of Chi-Yu, we have Ogerpon Hearthflame running a Grassy Glide set with the Rillaboom. So being able to go for really strong priority moves on the whole team, really. Sucker Punch on Chi on the Chenpao, Rillaboom, Grassy Glide with Terra Grass, Miracle Seed can just knock out Rillaboom or knock out Urshifu. Embody Aspect, Terastallization, Hearthflame form. Grassy Glide will knock out a Rillaboom from full if they don't go for a defensive Terra. Thunderclap from a very offensive Raging Bolt, unless they're very bulky on the Urshifu, will just go down in one. So definitely a lot of hate for Urshifu on this team, I'm noticing, which is important. It can do really well against Chenpao, as well as force a Terastallization out of the Zamazenta pretty early to not take a ton of damage from the Surging Strike. So I do like that a fair bit. And then the key standout on the team is definitely the Annihilape. Zamazenta is definitely a type of Pokemon where if you just take care of one of your opponent's really annoying Pokemon, Zamazenta can kind of just clean the rest of the game, whether it has, regardless of what partner Pokemon you have on the field. So having a Pokemon like Annihilape that can just go for a knockout turn one with a max HP Final Gambit can be pretty cool. A lot of the restricted Pokemon only have base 100 HP, so you do just get to knock them out in one. One of the main exceptions to this is, of course, Terapagos, but you have Zamazenta to handle that with the body press anyway, so it's not a huge concern. But I do think the Annihilape is definitely a cool differentiator on this team. You also have coaching for the rest of the Pokemon. You could coach up an Ogerpon to get bulky on the defensive side, as well as be able to go for an Embody Aspect Terastallization to suddenly be +2 and go for really strong Ivy Cudgels and knock out pretty much everything. You can think of it like this. At +2, you're basically just ignoring the type chart. Anything that resists you is now neutral, and you can potentially just knock them out in one. So very cool team. Moving on to the 4th place team, as well as 2 performances in the top 8, I believe. Yeah, we had Cohen and then Seongjae Jung, which is I believe the player that got top 4 at Worlds with this team. So as well as Yan Sam, one of the best Miraidon players from US internationals, rather North American international. A lot of strong players on Miraidon this weekend. Had a 4th place and then 2 top 8s, not a huge surprise. Going into some detail here, I did just take the EV spreads directly from Luca Cherubelli's Worlds team, despite there being, some differences in basically the Urshifu. I think Luca had the water type, and then all of the players in this top cut had the dark type. Some of them had Terra Dark, some had Stellar Terra. This is the exact open team sheet from Yan Sim, which was the highest finishing one, but most of them are Terra Dark. We have, I think some run Psychic, some run Psychic Noise. It just depends on how you want to handle Amoonguss a little bit better. We'll do more damage to that, but if you Psychic Noise them, they can't switch and basically get Regenerator, so that's a pretty cool aspect, as well as they can't use Pollen Puff. That can be pretty cool. There is some different Terras. Some people run Grass Terra on the Iron Hands. Some people run Heavy Slam over Wild Charge, but most of them are Fake Out, Drain Punch, Low Kick. Low Kick was a really cool innovation towards the World Championship because it does 120 base power to a lot of the restricteds, and notably does it to Calyrex-Ice Rider. So Helping Hand, Assault, Quark Drive boosted Low Kick gets pretty close to a knockout. You just need a little bit of chip, so you can definitely make that matchup, which is generally in your favor, just way, way better for you as well, without needing to run Water Terra on the Iron Hands or something like that. Since Luca has a team report out on Victory Road, definitely check that out for some of the details on the EV spreads. Interestingly, we had another hot week for Groudon. It ended up getting, I think, a top 4 and a top 8 last Victory Road tour. Now it got another top 8, so I kind of thought it'd be a one-off, but it is continuing to do really well, so I might have to reevaluate my Groudon takes a little bit. This is more or less just the Joe Ugarte team that got top 8 last time, but this time replacing the high horsepower with a bulk up, which is definitely a bit higher, higher variance, having to rely as Precipice Blades as your only offensive ground type move. But you can get steamrolling way faster with bulk up. You can become defensively really difficult to deal with, as well as take advantage of sleep powder turns a little bit better. But the trade-off, of course, being that you do have to take, rely entirely on Precipice Blades if you're trying to knock out an Incineroar or something, whereas a high horsepower has 10 more accuracy and gets the same KO. So cool team overall. I did mention it a lot in last week. The main difference I see is a Bullet Seed on the Heart Flame, so you can go for a Bullet Seed. If you 3-hit a Urshifu, you probably knock it out. Definitely, if you go for Terra Fire Bullet Seed, you have a very strong chance to knock it out with 2. Less consistent against Choice Scarf Urshifu, where a Wood Hammer would always knock it out, but able to knock out through Focus Sash on most other Urshifus. So that's a pretty cool addition there. Beyond that, we have another bulky Raging Bolt just Volt switching around to get the Jump Bluff and the Incineroar in to protect the Groudon, a Dark Urshifu with Stellar Terra to be able to pin people in Tailwind that are just trying to protect and stall that out, and then Incineroar as another Rocky Helmet set, just trying to outspeed things such as Ogerpon with the speed investment here, and then trying to tank hits from opposing Urshifu with the Rocky Helmet. They're really going to have struggles dealing with this Incineroar. They will just have to go for close combat because in Sun, Surging Strike is going to do less than half and they'll take half damage. So you'll actually be winning that damage trade, which is kind of crazy. So overall, cool team. Interesting to see Groudon continuing its success online. We'll see how that translates to the first European regional. Next up, we saw the Terapagos Balance team that was really dominating online. I don't think there are any notable changes. I've adjusted some of the EV spreads. There is I used to be running a max defense on the Incineroar before realizing that basically the difference between max defense and 188 defense on the Urshifu rule is actually 0. It's the same rule. You don't get any benefit from going max defense versus Surging Strike, so you do get to cheat and go a little bit more special defense there, or you could just go for max defense if you want to take hits like, Glacial Lance into high horsepower a little bit better, but you are already living that anyway, so it's not a huge concern. The Rillaboom on this team is pretty interesting. You run Terra Grass, Grassy Glide with near max attack if you want to have a very good chance to knock out opposing Urshifu. If you don't like that, you could just go a little bit bulkier, but this is just the set I have on it. Then I should mention the Terapagos is outspeeding opposing Incineroar or max speed Incineroar by 1 point, and then another just so that you're consistently outspeeding your own Rillaboom. Main thing on this set is although we are Calm Mind, we don't go for Earth Power here, we go for Substitute to be able to ignore things like Amoonguss, or just if there's an off turn where people are double protecting and we've already gotten a Calm Mind up, it's not that high value. Substitute can make it really hard to just chip down your Terra Shell and close combat you in the end game. Like if you have that Substitute up, then the Urshifu is just going to have a miserable time beating you in that late game. So yeah, pretty interesting that this team did not do as well. Top 8's obviously a very great performance, but considering how dominant in the top 8 it was in previous weeks and it ultimately winning one of the tours, I believe. Maybe the presence of all the Zamazenta towards the top of the cut was a bit of an issue for it. But yeah, definitely a bit of a fall off for the Terapagos here. Going into the rest of the cut, I did cover this exact team in a previous week, so I don't want to go into the details in too much. The idea is basically just chip down the problem Pokemon for your sweeper in the back, and then just try and win from there. And it's kind of hard to predict exactly what your sweep will be, just because it could be the Dragonite, Goldengo, or Dozo, or even the Miraidon. So yeah, kind of a tricky team to play against. The lone Calyrex-Ice Rider in this top cut was, I believe, the Hierophome team, except instead of the Nevermelt Ice, went for Clear Amulet here, which I'm not sure, hard to say, depends on if you play Incineroar or not. Then Nevermelt Ice is pretty much always better, but Incineroar usage does seem to be pretty high right now, so went for Clear Amulet here. Terra Poison is an interesting typing. If you're up against, say, the Mono Fighting type and Heavy Slam Iron Hands, then Terra Poison is definitely very strong, but it's also quite strong against the Toxic Spikes, Poison Gas, Weezing team that has been doing pretty well. So yeah, definitely an interesting Terra type, but has its niches for sure. Beyond that, it's just a very balancy Calyrex-Ice Rider team with some of the strongest special attackers in the format, and Raging Bolt, Fluttermane being supported by Chi-Yu with Covert Cloak, so you don't get fake outed by opposing Pokemon, so you can just go for Overheat, Heat Wave, Snarl unimpeded. Fluttermane goes for the Icy Wind to allow for the Urshifu to attack first, as well as the Cornerstone. To combo with the Icy Wind, I'm running the same EV spreads that Navjeet Joshi was running with his Electroweb Regieleki. Not entirely sure what a lot of it does, but basically just running a lot of general bulk with HP. Still a lot of attack investment and then a fair amount of speed. You can almost guarantee you'll be the fastest Calyrex-Ice Rider in the mirror, so that's a pretty cool benefit, even when you're not going for Icy Wind. You could outspeed opposing Incineroar if they're running low speed, but yeah, outside of that, a pretty cool team overall. Definitely very balanced oriented. Not a lot of times you're going to be going into the Trick Room, just because really only the Raging Bolt benefits from it, and that's also pretty fast. So next up, we have two Dondozo Calyrex Shadow Rider teams based on the team that Justin Knox got 5th place at Worlds with, something that was not on anyone's radar coming into the World Championship, but has had lots of variations come out since then. Usually it's a Terra Normal Hyper Beam set I've been seeing online, which is definitely very threatening. Deals well with the mirror because you can go Terra Normal to avoid the Astral Barrage damage. And then in general use cases, you can just go for Life Orb, Terra Normal Hyper Beam, and pretty much clear anything off the field. The identity of the team is definitely with the Weezing and the Dondozo. So Weezing, you're trying to go for Toxic Spikes or Poison Gas early to poison the Pokemon on the field to allow for your very bulky Dondozo with a order up with a Droopy Tatsugiri, which if you didn't know gives you a defensive boost. Go for that, as well as Body Press and then Earthquake to just do a ton of damage to your opponent as they slowly chip down from your Earthquakes, and protects as they are poisoned while you're healing up from leftovers and just getting even harder to kill if you ever get an order up. The Tatsugiri is not super interesting, a Focus Sash set with Terra Stellar in case you just come down to an end game where you just want to hit Terra Stellar and go for a strong one of your 2 attacks. Helping Hand can be cool if you lead, for example, Tatsugiri plus Calyrex Shadow Rider, and they don't have any defensive counterplay to a Helping Hand Astral Barrage, which sometimes can be the case if they're just really counter-leading Weezing. That can be cool. Roaring Moon is strong in the mirror against opposing Shadow Rider because you can go for the outspeed and knockoff to force the Terastallization, or just Tailwind and then maybe go for a Psychic as they go for Terra, or a Hyper Beam if they are forced to Terra early on. That can be cool. And then Terra Flying Acrobatics just does a ton to Rillaboom, Urshifu, and opposing Calyrex after they have gone for the Terra if they did go for that option, so cool there. Ogerpon, this last slide is kind of interchangeable. The other team that we're going to go over basically has almost exactly the same stuff, but the Iron Hands over the Ogerpon, that could be, for opposing Miraidon, I imagine that could be a problem, although Weezing Galar can just shut off the Hadron engine, so no electric terrain will go up. But yeah, the Ogerpon here to be able to redirect attention, allow the Calyrex Shadow Rider to sweep kind of independently of the Dozo mode. So yeah, you can imagine someone going Roaring Moon, Calyrex Shadow Rider, or maybe Ogerpon Shadow Rider with Roaring Moon in the back, and just cleaning up with the Shadow Rider mode instead of defaulting to the more bulky mode there. As mentioned, we had another of these teams in top 8 or top 16. The difference here being no psychic move. We have Taunt on this Calyrex Shadow Rider. Everything else outside of Terra types being pretty much the same. Pretty much exactly the same outside of the Weezing Terra type. And then Iron Hands being a very interesting set. Terra Fire Assault Vest, which seems very targeted to Terra Fairy Miraidon, forcing them to go for that early game and then popping a Terra and basically trying to 1v1 them, maybe with Heavy Slam or even Drain Punch after the Terra Fire, probably not taking that much from the Dazzling Gleam and you're out damaging with Drain Punch. That's pretty cool. For the EV spreads, I'm running max special defense to be able to tank the special hits in the meta very, very well. Running 187 just because at this point we get the beneficial extra point from our nature, the 187 bump point, and then the rest is in defense just because that allows us to take hits from opposing Urshifu and Calyrex-Ice Rider a bit better. The remaining, basically the defense allows you to tank Glacial Lance into high horsepower and not get knocked out a lot more consistently than if you were just no bulk. Okay, next up we have 2 Calyrex Shadow Rider hyper offensive teams. This one is definitely the bulkier of the 2. We have 2 Follow Me users, one with Rocky Helmet, Terra Fire, Terra Blast, and DD. Never seen that set before, definitely interesting. No Trick Room, just entirely going for the Tailwind offense mode and the Calyrex Shadow Rider offense. Psychic Surge, of course, benefiting the Expanding Force on the Calyrex a fair bit, allowing you to go for an additional offensive moves, potentially if you're playing against, say, a Terra Normal Calyrex-Ice Rider, having the option to just go for the alternative spread move of the Expanding Force could be pretty important. For the EVs, just to explain them, I'm outspeeding 206, which is Iron Bundle with no speed booster. But really, this is just outspeeding the base 205s, which are Groudon, Qianpao, Fluttermane, and Miraidon without, having to worry about being underspeeding them. Even though we are a bit bulkier of a Calyrex Shadow Rider, I still do want to be outspeeding those key metagame threats. The bulk here with Friend Guard allows you to tank a 3 Glacial Lances from Calyrex-Ice Rider. I think that's pretty important. Just not getting knocked out in 2 definitely changes the matchup a fair bit. Then the rest is dumped into special attack. Not a whole lot to comment on for the Urshifu. It's just a Focus Sash Stellar Terra set. The Stellar Close Combat, a key matchup piece into opposing Terapagos, which is definitely very annoying for you, given that it can get rid of your Psychic terrain so that your Expanding Forces aren't doing as much, as well as just ignore all the Follow Me on the team. So can be kind of annoying. And the Mouse Hold is just a pretty simple set. We're not running any attacks on this outside of Taunt that aren't priority. So no speed here. You could go for a Taunt if there's something very specific that you want to be outspeeding and taunting, but I'm just going max defense here. You could invest in special defense. I'm not entirely sure what you want your Mouse Hold to be able to take, but yeah, you'll never take a close combat from Urshifu, so don't even think about that. So maybe special defense is better. But yeah, outside of that, Feint, very cool with Calyrex Shadow Rider. If you're up against Calyrex-Ice Rider, oftentimes they'll try to play very defensive against you. So you can either taunt their Amoonguss, taunt their Calyrex to stop Trick Room from going up, or go for Feint. And so having the option to basically just the presence of Feint forces a Calyrex-Ice Rider or any other Pokemon very weak to the Calyrex Shadow Rider that has Protect than just immediately pop a Terra or have to switch out. So very cool there. Taunt strong against Amoonguss. You can go for even like in a pinch against a Amoonguss plus Calyrex-Ice Rider Trick Room, and you really can't let them get Trick Room up. You could go for Terra Grass Taunt to stop that by ignoring the Rage Powder. Then last up, we have the Follow Me to redirect away from the Calyrex Shadow Rider, as well as any of the other offensive pieces on the team. Friend Guard, very, very critical for allowing the Calyrex Shadow Rider to be even bulkier than it already is. Not doing anything too crazy with the Raging Bolt, just outspeeding a modest Chi-Yu Scarf. They hit 228, while we will hit 230 in Tailwind, so that's cool there. You can just hit it with a strong Thunderbolt or Dragon Pulse to chip it in range of the Calyrex Shadow Rider potentially. We also have the defensive spread to be able to tank a Glacial Lance. I think at this point we have a 25% chance to live a Glacial Lance from max attack Calyrex-Ice Rider, as well as if we go for the Terra, we should take 2. So I do like that a lot. Then Tornadus, I'm running a Eevee spread that outspeeds a Focus Sash Urshifu and then knocks it out with a modest Bleak Windstorm in the case where they are like Splash Blade or something, but usually they will be Focus Sash, so I'm not super sold on the spread, but also has a fair amount of bulk in HP, and then physical bulk to be able to live a Surging Strikes from, I want to say it's Rain Boosted Urshifu, or maybe Terra Water, but I'm not entirely sure at this point. Definitely feel free to fiddle around with the Torn spread. Then the other Calyrex Shadow Rider team that went very deep was this team with a Regidrago. Outside of that, very similar in a lot of ways, a bit less of a focus on bulk, but definitely still the Nasty Plot Expanding Force set, this time with Life Orb, just going all out offense, no Friend Guard in sight. Just the Follow Me Indeedee with the Helping Hand, and then an additional Follow Me Pokemon in Ogerpon that will obviously also function as an offensive piece. So if, for example, you have a Urshifu in front of you, you can go for a Astral Barrage and have something on the team that can also follow up with an Ivy Cudgel or a Power Whip to take the KO without having to take any damage back. Then we have an offensive Urshifu, Stellar Terra to be able to handle Terapagos, and then Regidrago as the kind of differentiator on the team. So with 2 Follow Me Pokemon, you can oftentimes not even go for Tailwind early on, just lead the Follow Me plus Regidrago, and if they don't have a spread move on their team, you just go for a free Follow Me Dragon Energy with the Dragon Fang Dragon's Maw. That's going to do a ton of damage to pretty much everything. Then after your Follow Me Pokemon goes down, bring in the Whimsicott, go for Tailwind, go for one more Dragon's Energy. If you aren't knocking out both Pokemon, eventually you just get to bring in the Shadow Rider and just take knockouts on the already chipped down Pokemon. So definitely a very oppressive team to play against if you do not have any spread damage or just anything that can take the onslaught of the spread moves. Then the last team that I want to cover in the top 16, or rather top 15, is the Kyogre. This is a variation of the team that Oliver Esklin got top 16 at the World Championships with. A very deep run for Kyogre. It's a Calm Mindset with Origin Pulse and Ice Beam, so definitely inconsistent on the Origin Pulse, but because of the presence of the Rillaboom and the leftovers, you'll be able to heal up a fair bit every turn, even if you miss the Origin Pulse. You have Calm Mind to get yourself bulky on the defensive side or the special defensive side. Incineroar with Fake Out or with Intimidate, and a Will-O-Wisp to allow you to get essentially bulked up on the physical side against your opposing team. Then an Amoonguss to buy you turns with Spore to go for multiple Origin Pulses or heal you up with Pollen Puff when you start to get low. And then the Urshifu is an offensive mix-up. In Rain, obviously you're doing a ton of damage. And then Roaring Moon is your option into opposing Calyrex Shadow Rider, which would otherwise be able to out-boost you with the Nasty Plot. So having something like Roaring Moon to knock them off, force them to go for Terra or go for Tailwind to set up for your own Kyogre to beat them in the 1v1, or even just chip them a lot with the Acrobatics so that Urshifu can clean them up late game with a Rain-boosted Surging Strikes, is a cool fold to the team. Previously, I think it was like a Grimmsnarl and a Raging Bolt in some of these slots, so definitely a lot more proactive with the Urshifu and the Roaring Moon. So that is going to do it for our overview of these team recreations for the Victory Road Challenge. It was definitely a very cool tour. Wasn't expecting Zamazenta to win, but given all the success of Terapagos in recent weeks, does make sense. But yeah, definitely does seem like Calyrex-Ice Rider still in the dumps with all the Calyrex Shadow Rider and the wildcard Zamazenta doing so well. Might end up staying there coming up into the first European regional, but of course only time will tell. So hopefully you all enjoy the resource of the EV spreads for these teams so you can test them on Pokemon Showdown yourself. If you enjoyed the videos, please leave a like, subscribe, and let me know what you want to see from the channel in the coming new year. Hopefully you guys have had a strong start to 2025 thus far. And yeah, with all that being said, peace y'all.